Hello, welcome to another How to Code Well YouTube video. My name is Peter Fisher, and today I want to talk about a topic that I briefly touched on in my previous video, which was what defines a great web developer. I'll put a link to that in the description below. And the topic I briefly mentioned in that video was why I think it's a foolish idea to deploy big websites using FTP. So today I'm gonna just expand on my reasonings, because I didn't actually give any kind of insight into why I think that in the previous video. So there's three reasons why I think FTP is a bad idea for deploying big websites. The first is the security. So FTP is inherently insecure by default. And that basically means that the username and the password and the host name and the credentials, they all fly up to the server when you log in using clear text. So they go up in their raw form. Now anyone who is sniffing around on the network using programs such as Wireshark or anything like that, they can pluck out that information, from the traffic, and they can detect and see what the username and password is. So you could have the most secure website in the world, but if your deployment isn't secure, then you're only as secure as your weakest link. Not only is the credentials insecure, but everything that you do, all the files that go up, they all go up unencrypted in their raw form. So anybody can just plug that down using, as long as they're using using programs like Wireshark, like I said. Now, I do appreciate there are ways to secure FTP, one of which is to use an SSH tunnel, and by doing so, instead of having FTP, you have SFTP, or Secure File Transfer Protocol. What that's doing is it's creating an SSH tunnel that you use to then transfer all the files. Also, there are ways to turn on certain encryption, and you can run it through different ports and so forth. But my beef with FTP is that they are not set by default. So anybody who deploys a website and doesn't have the technical know-how, or just isn't aware of it, will just be sending everything up in their raw form, which isn't great. So that's the first reason. So that's the security bit over and done with. The second one is the speed. So in my opinion, pushing up large websites, and when I mean large websites, I mean anything that has like a vendor's directory. So you're requiring, you're injecting dependencies to the website, that such as, like, for example, if it was a Symfony site, or whether it was even a WordPress site, right? You can use a composer with WordPress and have dependencies in there. I suppose you would say that the theme and the plugins of a WordPress site are dependencies that your site requires. So we're talking about websites that have thousands of files, right? Which nowadays are quite common. They take an awful long time to go from nothing to the full website. An awful lot of time pushing up those files. Now, I know that especially with things like FileZilla, you can use workers, and that will allow you to push up more than one file at a time, and that can speed up the stuff, but it's still really, 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 really slow. It's slower than, say, deploying it using SSH or something. So it's not only the upload that takes the time, but it's also the download. So for example, if you get another developer in and he's working on a website, and he has to pull down all the files and set up his development environment, again, he's pulling down thousands of files to his machine, which just takes time. Okay, it just takes a good couple of minutes to get up and running. We're talking 10 minutes to get a website together. It's And of course, this will be greater the greater the size of the site. So that's the second reason, the speed. And the third reason is workflow. So this is a bit tricky to just sort of like say, so I guess I'm going to have to use a couple of examples. So let's say you've got a team of developers, or any more than 2 developers or 1 developer working on the website. So you could have a graphics guy, you could have a back-end guy, you could have a guy working on JavaScript, and so forth. If they're working on the same file, then you often get into a situation where FTP isn't intelligent enough to work out what file or what portion of the file has actually been updated. Because you're literally just pushing up a single file. FTP uses file size and timestamp, or the epoch date, the last modified date, to determine which file takes precedent, which file is the latest file, right? So if you've got, say, 2 guys and they're working on, I don't know, use an experience that I've had, like a contact form, for example, and me as a back-end dev, I would be working on the PHP side, so I'll be working on, say, how the file gets sent up, how the data from the contact form gets validated and then pushed up to the server. So I'm working on that, and there's a front-end dev who's working on how the form looks and interacts. So they could be putting the form into a pop-up, or they could have it in an overlay, or they could be manipulating graphic, or just changing the CSS, so adding CSS classes and selectors to the form elements. So both of us are working on the same area of the website, and there will be some overlap in terms of there will be, both of us will be at some point working on the same file. So I'll be working on the same file that he'll be working on when he's dealing with HTML, or she'll be working on with HTML. Now let's say I've done my work, right? I've finished my work and it's all done, and I'm waiting for the front end dev, or vice versa, right? So the person who's finished uploads their work, right? Now, whilst I'm pushing up my stuff, the other developer could still be working on their stuff, and they could still be working on the file that I've just uploaded, but they haven't downloaded the latest changes yet. So they're still working in their own little isolated file, right? And then he or she pushes up their changes to the server. Now, like I said, FTP isn't intelligent enough to work out, well, that portion of that file's changed, so I'm going to grab that and sort of source control it, and so sellotape the whole thing together. It's going to go, no, okay, so Pete's just uploaded his stuff, say in the afternoon, and then the other front end guy has just uploaded their stuff, say an hour later. So I'm going to use that guy's stuff as what's on the website. That's going to override my changes, okay? Because my changes are now seen as old in the FTP world. So that's going to override my changes. So then I have to go back. Do you see what I mean? I have to then go back and then put in my stuff. So that's happened to me a couple of times. And that's where there is a team of developers, and they're all working on FTP at the same time, and it just gets into a bit of a headache. I mean, it's okay, obviously, if there's only one of you, but especially when you're a freelancer and you get given the FTP details, and you're like, yeah, great, okay, and then you find out that you're actually working in a team of other developers, and they're all working on the same file. It gets a bit of a headache. You end up having to send either Skype messages or emails saying, I've just updated, can you please download my latest changes? Yeah, it gets a bit of a headache. So that's the third reason, workflow. So we've covered security, speed, and workflow. Now, just I guess I should mention a couple of ways that you could get around all of this. And I mean, obviously, a good way obviously is to not use FTP. And use something else like, for example, my preference is to use software like Capistrano. So that's a set of Ruby tasks, or they call it a Ruby recipe. And in that recipe, you can define certain tasks that happen before, during, and after deployment. Okay. So, for example, you might want to back up the previous website. Okay, you might want to put a message up saying maintenance or something. You might want to minify and uglify the data. So you could be compressing the JavaScript or the CSS or the PHP, and then before it actually gets deployed, as in you've just pushed the files up, before it actually gets deployed, it gets turned on, you might want to run a series of unit tests. So unit tests, integration tests, functional tests, whatever. And then off the outcome of that, it then gets deployed. You might need to migrate a couple of things. So for example, if your deployment requires database changes, you might need to run those before it gets deployed to update the database. All of those deployment tasks can't be done very easily using FTP. In fact, a lot of them just can't be done using FTP. A lot of them will be done individually, sort of outside of the deployment world. But in my opinion, they should all be sort of under the banner of deployment, because they're all part of the deployment of a website. And you can use things like, like I said, Capistrano to string them all together. So you end up with a story, almost like a story of how this website is going to be deployed, or how the application is going to be deployed. Obviously, there's a lot of other things that other tools that you can use. It doesn't have to be Capistrano, of course. It could be anything. You could, for example, just write your own stuff. So roll your own deployment script. In fact, I would suggest rolling your own series of scripts, right? So you have your backup script, you have your migration script, you have your compression script, you have your CDN script. So you might want to be pushing your shared assets to a CDN. And then, so you've got a bunch of scripts, and then all you do is have one script that then points to those, right? So then you run that one script, and everyone's good. And then at the end of it, you might have it sending an email out to everyone saying, we've just deployed RC, blah, 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 1.5 or whatever. Get some automation in place, and then maybe take a look at Capistrano or whatever to wire them all together. Another way you could deploy a site, of course, if you've got SSH access, is just to zip it up and push it up, right? Or you could just you could use your source control. So you could tag a release from SVN or Git and push that, and there you go. So with that, of course, you've got deployment pipelines. So you can say that there's going to be a code freeze at this version, and then that gets deployed. So you can really deployment of a website is quite a large topic. So I'm a fan of continual integration. So that's where you write your code, test your code, deploy it as soon as it's ready. It doesn't necessarily need to go live. You could have a switch that turns it on and off. So whilst you're developing your work, say for example you're pushing a new feature, right? You could be deploying that to your production or your testing staging server, right? Or your production server. And as long as it's not public facing, you could still be pushing that up, running tests against it, running it against production data. And then when it comes to the point where you need to turn it live, you just hit the switch and or change the config, and there you go. That means that you're less likely to do big bang deployments. Now, big bang, like I said, this is a massive topic, and I probably should break this down into other videos. But big bang is like where you you have a whole raft of changes. So this is using the waterfall methodology. You have a whole raft of changes, and you're just throwing it over the fence, and you're saying, right, there you go. Say, like, you draw a line in the sand, and you say, at this date, all of these huge change log will go live. That's very, very, very risky, especially if you do it on a Friday, or especially on a Friday where you've got Bank Holiday Monday the next week. So with a more of an agile process, you can start, refining your workload in sprints and deploying as you go, right? So your first deployment should be as complicated as your last deployment in the continual integration world, okay? Yeah, I could talk about this for weeks on end. It's a rather large thing, but I really just want to use this video to discuss why I feel FTP is a bad idea, especially when you're deploying large websites. It's a bad idea. So speed, security, and workflow, they're bad smells when it comes to FTP. All right, so I'm going to leave it there. Tomorrow I'm going to push my next Docker tutorial video, so do subscribe to get that, or like if you like this video. Thanks again for watching, and I shall see you all soon. Cheers, bye.